Hey, what's going on guys? Welcome back to part 5 of my Game Boy Zero build. In this video we're going to be doing the final installation of the buttons, as well as the PCB and teensy. We'll be installing the circuit board for the screen, and then on the back of the casing we're going to be installing the LNR tactile switches, a full-size USB port, as well as the charging port. I wanted to go over a few modifications that I've done since the last video. You can see that I've shortened up the wires going from the PCB to the teensy. I've also hot glued the connections down on both of them as well. Now this will decrease the likelihood of a wire coming loose from the boards. On the screen circuit board, I've taken off the white wire as well as hot glued the wires in there. Now over here, I've cut down the edges of the X and Y pad, as well as with the X and Y buttons, I shaved off the 90-degree edge that's on the bottom side of these buttons because they were rubbing on all the ridges of the 3D printed button guides. Now let's start by attaching the screen circuit board to the back of the screen. To do this, I've attached a piece of double-sided adhesive to the back here. That will prevent the circuit board from coming in contact with the back of the screen. But first things first, we need to connect the ribbon cable to this circuit board. Now that we have the ribbon cable connected, we can go ahead and attach the circuit board to the back of the screen. We can go ahead and take all the buttons and put them in the appropriate holes now. Now that we have all the buttons in here, we can go ahead and take the PCB and mount it down. On my build, I'm not actually going to be putting the screw in the top right corner here, because when the Raspberry Pi is in there, this bottom USB port is actually right where that screw would be. The last thing that we need to do to the front of the casing here is take some hot glue along the back of the teensy and mount it in this upper left corner. Once the glue is hardened to hold the teensy in place, we can then move on to installing the components in the back of the casing. On the back of the casing here, the first thing that we're going to do is modify this charging port so we can fit it in this corner over here. As you can see on this board, it has these lines right here in the center. These lines are actually the circuitry going from the connector to the pinout. Because of this, we can actually go ahead and grind off everything else on this board. When you have that done, it should look a little something like this. Now to get this to work in the casing, we're actually going to have to oval out this hole on the side here. Once you have the opening cut out, you're going to need to cut out this top post here to allow a little more clearance for this connector to fit in there. Once you have the opening all cut out, go ahead and test fit your connector in there. You can see I actually had some clearance issues with this piece of metal, so I had to bend it out of the way. But once you have it to where it fits in the way you like it, go ahead and put a dab of glue on the back and glue it to a piece of perf board. Now that you have the connector glued to a piece of perf board, go ahead and glue this perf board down to this metal housing. Once you have that glued down, go ahead and add a little more glue just to hold it in place. Once the extra glue has dried, go ahead and grab a micro USB and test it out. You're going to want to give it a little wiggle in there as well, just to make sure nothing's moving. If any of these boards are moving, you're going to want to add a little more hot glue to it. Once you have finished securing the charge port, we can then move on to installing the USB port. Now the first thing that we need to do is actually wire it up. Once we have it wired up, we're going to want to wrap it in electrical tape to prevent it from shorting out on anything in the case. Once you have that taped up, we can then go ahead and mount it in the casing. I've seen a lot of videos where people actually notch out these two lower corners here to make them right angles, but in my build I'm not actually going to be doing that. I've actually modified the USB port by cutting off the sides of the little plastic piece so the factory connector cover for the casing actually fits right inside the USB port. So when it's all said and done, it should have a much more factory look to it. Once you have it positioned in there exactly the way you want, you can then go ahead and add some more glue to hold it in place. Now, once all that glue has dried, go ahead and grab a USB and test it out. And just like in the last one, give it a little wiggle, and if it has substantial movement in there, make sure you add a little bit more glue to hold that in place. Now before we move on, we're actually going to wire up our charge port. So to do that, we're just going to put a ground wire on top and a positive wire on the bottom. Now that we have those in, we can move on to installing the L and R buttons. When we go to wire these little tactile switches up, if we take a look at the bottom here, these two top posts are connected and the two posts on the other side of that space are connected. So we're going to wire up ground on one side and then positive on the other side. And one last thing, instead of running a ground to each switch, we can actually run one ground to one switch and then connect the other prong to the other switch. We can now go ahead and take this and glue these two tactile switches into the Game Boy. So if you're satisfied with the way that it looks and feels, then we are all done with the L and R buttons. Now one last thing I wanted to touch on, you might notice that the green and white wires for my USB are actually twisted, and this is to reduce interference into the data lines of the USB. So if you enjoyed this video and it helped you out, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe down below. In the next video, we're going to be going over installing the power switch as well as the Power Boost 1000C. I'll also be going over how to disassemble and install a USB hub into the Game Boy Zero. If that's something that you're interested in, be sure to subscribe down below to be notified when that video goes up. And until then, I'll see you in the next video.